Okay, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. We're excited that you came here to spend an hour with us. This is part of our ongoing monthly series through the Greater Tampa Realtors Government Affairs Committee. Once a month, we bring in a guest speaker or a panel of speakers to talk to us as real estate professionals about issues that are important to us as real estate practitioners, for our homeowner clients, for our business owner clients, and everything that has to do with the Tampa Bay community. So we're excited that you came, and we're excited for our guest speaker today, Melissa Zornitta, who is the Executive Director of Plan Hillsborough. So with that, a couple of housekeeping notes out of the way, we'll get right into our program, and I'll give a quick introduction to our speaker today. Our speaker, Melissa Zornitta, has been the Executive Director of Plan Hillsborough since 2015, where she has actually worked for Plan Hillsborough since 2001. And before that, she was a planner for both Charlotte County here in Florida, as well as St. Petersburg. She's got her bachelor's degree from William & Mary, and she's got a master's in urban and regional planning from FSU, which, even though I'm a Gator, I definitely know FSU's real estate program and urban and regional planning program is a very good program. So, kudos to you for that. So, Melissa, those are a couple of things that we know about you. What are a couple of things that we don't know about you?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I am originally from Virginia. That's why I went to William and Mary undergrad and grew up outside the DC area. And so I really enjoy that there are political aspects to my job as well as the planning aspects. So that's something that my job really blends nicely for me. I've got two kids who are in elementary school, and they're twins, and we've been here about 20 years and love the Tampa area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, it's good to get to know you a little bit more. And again, thank you very much for coming to speak to our group today. So our group is made up of realtors who practice both residential and commercial real estate. Our area covers pretty much all of Tampa Bay. So we have plenty of people that live and work in Hillsborough County, but we have some in Pasco County, Pinellas County, and certainly that do transactions throughout the state of Florida. But most of us are based here in Tampa and Hillsborough County. So obviously talking with you and long-range planning, that's going to be an exciting conversation for us. But before we kind of dive into some questions, for our attendees that are unfamiliar with Plan Hillsborough or really don't know about it, can you kind of give us an overview of what exactly is the organization and what are some functions of Plan Hillsborough?
Absolutely. So our full official title is the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission, which is a bit of a mouthful and why we often just call ourselves Plan Hillsborough. But we were established in the late 50s by state statute to serve as the consolidated long-range planning agency for all four local governments here in Hillsborough County. So we do the same functions for the city of Tampa that we do for Temple Terrace, Plant City, and the unincorporated county. So those functions are that we are charged with fulfilling state requirements for there being a long-range comprehensive plan. Every local government in the state of Florida is required to have one, and all new development has to be consistent with that comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan lays out the county or the city's vision for the future. It touches on topics related to growth and development, transportation, infrastructure like water and sewer and stormwater, housing. There are a number of required elements, and then each local government can adopt other sections if they want to their comprehensive plan. So our primary function is making sure that stays up to date, which occurs through updates periodically, but also Hillsborough County and the cities are all large. And so regularly we have private developers who will ask for amendments to the comprehensive plan because we have a map that lays out what type of development should occur where. It's called the future land use map. And regularly folks, the market is ahead of where the planners might be in certain areas. And so they'll come forward and say they'd like to make a change to that map. So that's one of our most regular activities to be doing. We also review all rezonings and other development applications for consistency with the comprehensive plan, because everything is that if they change the land development code, if they change the zoning map, any of those changes are supposed to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission also serves as the staff to the Hillsborough Transportation Planning Organization, which handles the long-range transportation planning that is federally mandated for every metropolitan area to have. And so that is an important function in terms of prioritizing transportation projects and funding that comes from the state and federal government to Hillsborough County. It has to be consistent with the Hillsborough County Long Range Transportation Plan. So we have a transportation team that handles that function. And we also provide staff support to the Hillsborough River Board, which is another unique state created entity that looks at the health of the Hillsborough River. And so I like to say that we deal with all things that are multi-jurisdictional, because we deal with all 4 local governments, and that are long range. And that's kind of our view of things.
Yeah, seriously. So that is a lot to unpack there, and I'm excited to kind of go through all of those things, because I think each one on its own is really interesting and really exciting. So we'll definitely kind of break each one of those components down and talk a little bit more. But kind of want to first talk about what's happening right now, and that's the coronavirus. And so it looks like you're working from home today. So kind of tell us kind of from 2 perspectives. So one from just managing the office and the staff there. How have you been dealing with the coronavirus? And then from a long range planning perspective, how does a pandemic like this affect some of the planning? So kind of talk to us kind of short term and long term effects of this.
Yeah, so our team is in the office on staggered schedules right now. So this is one of my days working remote. So we have tried to embrace the flexibility of remote work, and we went fully remote immediately. County Center basically shut down the facility for a short bit. And we've been very successful in maintaining operations. And, there have been a couple of things that we've had to learn how to do a little differently in terms of making sure somebody picks up the mail, that type of thing. But now we have some folks who are in the office every day. It's just a different group of folks. We thought we would be ramping that back up to more days a week. But certainly the Delta variant and all the things that are happening now, we're evaluating that kind of on a week by week basis. But if you were to go to the 18th floor of County Center, you would find staff there ready to help customers. And we're happy that the facility is now allowing visitors up to our floor again. Probably one of the biggest changes has been for us for public meetings. We have quite a number of public hearings on a monthly basis. We have community meetings on projects, and all of those, we've had to adapt our approach on them to first go all virtual, and then now create a hybrid opportunity for people to participate. And I kind of think the hybrid opportunity for people to participate is going to be here to stay. A lot of folks like that they can log into a hearing at 6 o'clock at night and participate from their home while they're making dinner, and not have to uproot their kids and take them to a public meeting. So we're actually getting more participation in some of our meetings. We also have found that there are some areas of the county that have a lot of difficulty with the virtual because they don't have internet access still. More rural areas of Hillsborough County, some of our more disadvantaged communities. So I think having the blend is a good thing. Long term for planning, there are a lot of potential interesting implications of this, and I don't know that we know them all yet. When we had a session with some professors of planning from USF last summer, and I remember them saying the longer the pandemic lasted, the more the changes in human behavior were probably going to stick. And I think that certainly we've seen that in our own work. I thought the remote working was going to be a 3-month thing. And then I thought, well, maybe 6 months. And now we're looking at, in some form or fashion, staff would be able to do that, a couple days a week permanently. So that changes how much office space might be needed, what our transportation forecasts for, traffic on the roads will be. So I think there's a lot there. Certainly, we had already started seeing a shift in brick and mortar retail demand before the pandemic. A number of stores and chains had closed, and the way the malls and things like that were being utilized were starting to be reimagined. And I think this is only going to continue to accelerate that, because Amazon's at my house a lot. I'm sure they're at a lot of other places too. So I think those are trends that we're watching very carefully to see how much of it will continue, and then how that impacts what our plans are, because we have plans that anticipate having commercial development along certain corridors. Maybe it won't have to be commercial always. Maybe that those become opportunities for redevelopment to higher density residential, and
Sure.
Provide some other opportunities in our community. We also are hearing a lot from industrial users wanting large warehouse and distribution facilities. Again, that had started before the pandemic, but particularly Plant City has been well positioned along I-4, wanting to attract more large warehouse facilities. So will there start to be smaller warehouse facilities because Amazon needs to get to my house quicker? Those are some of the things that we're looking at as potential implications. And I think it's going to take a little time to see exactly how it'll play out.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, and that's kind of what everybody's doing too. From our residential realtor perspectives, things like home office or home school room, have now become the hot buzzwords now for people needing to work from home. So it's interesting to see how every industry is going to change moving forward from this. And I guess that's why it's important to have a long-term plan for what we expect, or at least what we hope and anticipate for Hillsborough County. So right now you have the 2045 Longrange Plan, which 25 years from now seems like such a long time in the future, but 25 years ago doesn't seem that long ago. So kind of walk us through why that 2045 and kind of what is it, but more importantly, why is it important? Why is it important to have a long range plan for our local community?
Yeah, obviously as a planner, I like to think ahead and lay out what's to come. And I think the biggest thing is that it takes a long time for change to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. If we're planning to widen a road, that has to be in the plan, 10 years ahead, to ensure that we line up the funding, do the engineering work, obtain all the right of way, and then do all the construction. So something that we're seeing now has been planned quite some time ago. And without having a roadmap of where we as a community want to go, we'll end up with something that will be very haphazard and not have the results that we're desiring. And so some of the key fundamentals of our plans are that we want to have choices for people in our community. I think that's one of the really unique things about Hillsborough County, is that we have the opportunity to live in an urban area, a suburban area, or a rural area. And some of the other counties in our area don't have that. Pinellas County doesn't have much rural area. Hillsborough County still does. And so we have to proactively plan to ensure we're going to keep those choices within our community. For a long time, when I started at the Planning Commission, downtown was not the robust, bustling area. I mean, Water Street was like a wish maybe one day, but it was in the plan. So that somebody when a visionary like Jeff Vinnick was able to come along and purchase that land, there was a plan that all of that could emerge and we could transform our downtown. So again, that all takes a lot of time for it to happen. It takes the right things lining up. Much of that is in partnership with folks like you all, with the real estate and development community bringing those other pieces online. But having the plan in place, having the tools in place to help through the zoning, through the right regulatory environment, really should enable the things we want to happen. And that's really the viewpoint that I take. And I think it's also important to know that the plan has to be nimble and change, because and so we update it about every 5 years, trying to look at what the trends have been, where the trends are now, and understand how we need to adapt to how the community is changing. And so that's something that our team is kind of always trying to keep a pulse on, because we know that the plan can't be static. It needs to evolve as the community evolves.
Sure, absolutely. And you talk about, taking a look at it, with that, and we see all this growth and development happening, to Tampa. So many people are moving to Hillsborough County and the Tampa Bay area. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that kind of affects, certainly some of the things that you do with a planning perspective. So tell us a little bit about, because Tampa is such a popular place for people to move to, how does that affect what's happening with the long-range plan?
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the things that's hardest for us as planners to anticipate is how soon some of the things we think are going to happen. So, for example, the planners for years had plans for downtown Tampa that were going to have a whole lot of redevelopment, Channelside and areas like Water Street. And it took a long time, and probably planners that predated me, were very frustrated that, gosh, why isn't downtown changing the way we hope it will? On the flip side, right now we're getting a lot of pressure about growth, and we're facing challenges like affordability in our marketplace, and some places where our densities may not be as high as the market now might want them to be. And so those are a lot of the changes that we end up seeing being brought to the Planning Commission, are asked to increase the density in different areas. And I think probably one of the biggest pressure points that we've had my entire career with the Planning Commission has been that interface of where the suburban stops and where the rural starts in our community. We have a tool called the Urban Service Area that is a boundary in the unincorporated area where growth is supposed to be focused within that urban service area. It allows the county to better plan for water, sewer, other urban level services that they know they're going to be focused in that area. But it also helps preserve the rural area outside of it. And, the communities of Keystone. And right now we're spending a lot of time in Balm and Waimama are, facing a lot of growth, have growth pressures. And, that then happens because Pasco has growth right along our boundary. Manatee County has growth right along our boundary. And so that puts some tough decisions in front of the communities to decide how much of that are they going to accommodate. Because even if they don't accommodate it and they want to remain rural, like in Keystone, they have folks who drive through Keystone every day to get home to Pasco County. And so there are different choices. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things facing us right now with all of this growth is how are we going to continue to accommodate the population and ensure affordability? And then also, how are we going to get folks to move around? Because one of our major strategies in our plan for decades has been that we would have a more robust mass transit system to assist with moving people throughout our community. And if you have a more robust mass transit system, you might not need, as much parking and other things that would allow more development in certain areas. Developers might build higher density, knowing that those folks could ride a bus or a train to get from the university area to downtown for work, for example. But we haven't progressed as far as I think some of us had hoped we would have in that conversation. We had a successful referendum 2 years ago that was overturned for a sales tax for transportation funding that would have allowed for some things like the expansion of the streetcar and additional bus rapid transit. Those projects are still moving forward with planning and engineering studies, but the funding still isn't there. And so that's another big challenge that I think, how are we going to keep moving all of these people? Because right now it doesn't seem quite as bad because we've got pandemic, a lot of people working from home level traffic, but at some point it's not going to be like that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to unpack a couple of things that you mentioned there. So one of the issues that's especially important for us as real estate professionals is housing affordability. And obviously with, an inventory shortage, with more people moving to Tampa and a whole host of other factors, it's hard to find a home at a reasonable price these days. One of the ideas floated around both here in Tampa and other metro areas is increasing the density, in that if you increase, the zoning density, you can have more residential units per acre, which means the prices can go down. So from a planning perspective, walk us through a little bit of that density conversation to say, if we do increase the density, we can get more units, which makes things more affordable. Does that conversation come up, in planning discussions?
Absolutely. And that's something we have a lot of density on our future land use map in certain areas. Sometimes the zoning is a lot lower than what the land use category allows. So for example, I live out in the Brandon area. The area around the Brandon Town Center Mall has one of our highest land use categories, but most of the time what people come in and get zoned for are garden apartments, 4-story apartments. They probably could get up to 35 units per acre, but maybe they're more at like a 20 unit per acre density. Not a bad thing, just there's the opportunity for us to maybe get it a little bit higher in some of those areas. And then there are other places. We've recently had a number of amendments along some of our corridors in the city of Tampa, along corridors like Causeway, in the unincorporated area, where the density in our plans has been maybe 9 units per acre, or in the city something like 12 or 16, and now the market is starting to get up to that 20 unit per acre. They're starting to see demand for apartments as opposed to townhomes or something like that. So certainly our plans, I think, try to be very supportive of higher density, particularly within that urban service area that I described, or within the city of Tampa. We have a number of incentives in place to encourage density that does include affordable housing. So there are density bonuses for folks who incorporate things that are truly affordable, getting at low and very low income level homes. But there's definitely a segment that is not the low and very low, but just they need something more affordable than what the market might be bringing. And definitely having more options seems like it would help that conversation than restricting the market.
Yeah. So when we look at cities, and we often compare ourselves to other cities, or when companies are looking to relocate here, the big three things that they often look at are the jobs and job opportunities, the transportation, and housing, and how well those three really tie together. So you mentioned a little bit about density and housing, what we can do there. Talk a little bit now, how does transportation fit into that? So if you have more dense areas, could you have more mass transit? Walk us through a little bit now. How does that transportation component, tie into all that?
Yeah, it's something that our organization spends a lot of time looking at. And I think it actually fits into the affordability question as well, because having to rely on a car is a big aspect to making your home affordable, because there's not only the cost of having to have a car payment, there's the cost of insurance, parking. A lot of times, I mean, parking in downtown has gotten a lot more expensive. So if that's where you work and you don't have another choice of how to get there, you have to get there by a car. The whole equation has gotten more expensive because of all of these things. So absolutely, having more choices and how we could get around would help that equation tremendously. Right now, I would say we have the density to have a much more robust transit system than we do. And I think Hart would agree with that. It's just Hart doesn't have the resources to provide it. And so for years, our plans have included having some form of rapid transit that gets from the university area to downtown over to West Shore. We also have had plans about connecting over to Brandon, a line connecting down to South Tampa, and then in the longer range, South County. But a lot of it comes down to the service has to be reliable and frequent enough for people to be willing to give up their car. So I'll use myself as an example. Living in Brandon, the express bus comes not far from my home. It comes 2 times in the morning and 2 times in the afternoon. So if those 2 times don't work for my work schedule, it doesn't work for me to take the bus. So if it was more frequent throughout the day, that would be a much greater alternative for me to take. And we see that some of the most successful bus routes in the city of Tampa, for example, along Florida and Nebraska, have great ridership. They come every 20 minutes. So people know that they can rely on it. And certainly that helps our transit dependent population who don't have cars and need that to get to work. But it also helps the more what we call choice riders who have a choice about whether or not they take transit. They're going to be more apt to take it if it's something that's reliable and frequent. The other issue that we've had because of the lack of resources is that the transit doesn't always go, the service stops at certain times of day, and service workers in particular might work much later hours than that. And not get off their shift until 11 o'clock at night, and there's no bus service. So those are things that I think are, in my mind, pretty high priorities to, even if we're not talking about a train or anything else that's fancier, just having more reliable bus service would go a long way to making that a viable choice for folks. And that, as I said, is a huge component of making housing affordability, housing more affordable, I should say.
Sure. Yeah. So now the fun part of the conversation where, you mentioned a couple of times resources, and a lot of times those resources are financial resources, and financial resources are planned and budgeted through local, state, and federal funds. And, at the beginning, you mentioned planning ties in a little bit of real estate development and construction, but also politics and government too. So what role does local, state, and federal, government officials, elected officials, what roles do they have in creating funds and resources to do all of these projects that you're talking about?
Yeah, so hopefully I'll get it all right, because it is kind of a bit of a maze to know where different funding sources come from. But certainly through the federal government, they provide federal highway dollars and federal transit dollars. And so those are 2 different pots of money that come out of the federal budget and then trickle down to the state DOT. And there are formulas that distribute some of them, and then some of them that we have to compete for. So, for example, the streetcar extension, I think, has put together an application to compete for federal transit grant dollars. So there, some of them are grant dollars that get given to us with no strings attached. Some of them are grant dollars that we have to match with local dollars. And so then that requires whether it's the city of Tampa or Hillsborough County, to bring some local funding to the table. It might also require the state DOT to bring some funding to the table. So it's a little bit of a puzzle to put it all together to get each individual project funded. The state legislature can have a great influence on this. For example, they accelerated funding for the Big Bend Road interchange in Hillsborough County. There's been quite a bit of focus on the West Shore interchange and the rebuilding of the Howard Franklin Bridge. That's been one of our biggest regional priorities, is that the state put money in to rebuild the Howard Franklin Bridge. But when you get off the bridge right there by the West Shore Mall, it like all narrows down and it's a horrible bottleneck. So that's been something that we got money through the legislature for. The pandemic delayed some of that funding. I think we're looking at that getting restored again to the right timing, so that those projects happen in sync with each other. Because that's the other thing, is like a lot of times these projects, they're big, they get segmented into different chunks, but you need the chunks to come together to make things flow well. And then locally, each local government certainly has local taxes, property tax revenue, sales tax. There's the community improvement tax that Hillsborough County has utilized for some infrastructure projects. Schools has a separate tax for capital projects for schools. So the measure that was on the ballot 2 years ago was looking at a 1% sales tax, which was kind of a intriguing measure in my mind, because that really captures some of the revenue that could be brought from visitors, because they spend a lot of money in our community and they need transportation to get around. And so the idea of having a transportation sales tax that could capture some of that funding stream was very attractive in my mind for that reason. And that did pass. It just was overturned in the courts. So, yeah. And I think the local governments are looking at bringing that forward in 2022. And that would allow us to make that local match on some of those projects that are bigger tickets.
Sure, absolutely. And that's something to that referendum and that ballot initiative. That was something that the Realtor Association supported for a lot of the same reasons that you would too. You know, part of our business, whether that's commercial real estate, residential real estate, comes from people moving here or visiting us here and then eventually deciding to move here. And so if we have those funds to be able to cater to those transportation needs, that's a benefit for all the community. And that's a shameless plug for a government affairs committee. That's a lot of the things that we talk about, is what's going on in our local state legislatures. How can we talk to our elected officials and say, these are the things that would benefit us as real estate agents, as our clients? How can we get those things that we need? So I encourage anybody that's watching, if you're interested in that, come to our government affairs meetings to talk a little bit more about those things. So when we talk about development and long range planning, I'm sure we take a look at other cities across the country and see, okay, what is this city doing? What is that city doing? Are there particular cities or metro areas that we take a look at to say, hey, we like a lot of those things that particular city is doing?
Yeah. Yes, we definitely have. We have looked a lot at places like Charlotte and Denver for their transit systems. Dallas, Texas has a very similar development pattern to the Tampa Hillsborough area, and has a very successful light rail system and a lot of higher density development, like we were discussing, around that system. We have recently been looking at places like Minneapolis for some of their unique policies in terms of housing affordability and equity issues. So absolutely, depending on what issue it is, we kind of try and find the best practices across the country with that regard. Just like you all have a Realtors Association, we have a planning association that we can tap into members across the country and find out what other people are doing. We recently were asked to do a study about mixed use by the city of Tampa and looked at places from Miami to Portland for examples of how they had structured their policies.
Nice. So when we look at, bigger metro areas, New York, Boston, DC, Chicago, LA, are there things that we can learn from the biggest metro areas, or do we only really look at the metro areas that are about our size?
No, we definitely look at some of those places as well. I think some of the things I would say, having grown up outside DC, some of the things we can learn are some of the things not to do sometimes as we become, a bigger metropolitan area like they are. For example, they've had a lot of maintenance issues because they neglected some of the maintenance of their infrastructure in the DC area. So fires on your metro system aren't a good attractor to more people riding it. So, things like that, making sure we have money set aside to maintain what we build is, just an example of one lesson learned there. So absolutely, I think we do try to be cognizant of the fact that our area has a lot of things that are unique in that we have a lot of area that's unincorporated, whereas many of those I was talking with a planner outside of Chicago, and everything is in its own city. Even outside of the city of Chicago, they have their own city. Whereas here in Hillsborough County, we have a lot of urban area that's unincorporated. And so, we do try to look at their practices and then kind of calibrate it for how it would work here.
Okay, nice. So kind of going back to our, 2045, the Hillsborough County long-range plan, tell us a little bit about where we are today with that. When was that plan first created? You mentioned every couple of years we review that. Where are we in that review process, and how's that plan coming along from its original creation?
Sure. Yeah, well, the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan was adopted about 2 years ago. And so it is required by federal law to get updated in about 3 years. So the cities of Tampa, Temple Terrace, and Plant City, they updated their plans in 2015 and 2016 with a horizon looking out to 2040 at that time. The county right now is updating its plan looking at the horizon of 2045. And we have updated sections related to water, sewer, stormwater, environment and conservation, and coastal management, and are working right now on sections related to mobility. We've got a couple of studies working on the housing and land use sections, and those we anticipate being updated early next year. So the city of Tampa, it hasn't been that, I think it was 2015 that their plan was updated. They have initiated the process to start updating their plan now. So we've been working with them on a visioning effort. They've had a number of sessions over the last few months through an effort called Tampa Moves that's been looking at mobility and growth issues. And we are working with them on now based on what we heard, what does that mean to change the policies of the comprehensive plan? So they are evolving documents, and they're all at a little bit different points. And I think that actually is really good because the communities are all changing. Plant City, they're kind of happy with their plan right now. They're not eager to update it at the moment. And that's okay. We want to be cognizant of each community's dynamics and what are the important issues for them.
Sure. Yeah. And so a couple of things you mentioned there, sustainability and resilience. So last week, City of Tampa, Mayor Castro, she released her budget, and the first time ever it had a resiliency plan. And it really dove into sustainability too. So how does sustainability and resiliency tie into long range planning too?
Yeah. Well, we're working very closely with the city on that to see what aspects of the resiliency plan need to move into the comprehensive plan to ensure that they are a part of that longer term vision. So some pieces will be more programmatic, things that the city will be doing, and others will be more policy. Things about how we approach growth along our coastline, whether or not we're encouraging density at the same level in all parts of the city, are things that we've been discussing. There's a lot of discussion with the folks, particularly south of Gandy Boulevard. They've been very animated through a number of rezoning and development decisions with city council. And we know that area wants some different consideration than perhaps downtown or West Shore. And so an example of that is that we've been working with the city on updating a policy that had allowed in certain land use categories for residential development to be considered based on the floor area ratio instead of the density. So that meant that in whatever size structure, you could put as many residential units as you wanted, as long as the size of the structure met that floor area ratio. As opposed to density, it would tell you you can only do 20 units per acre or whatever. So it was allowing development potentially to get more units on the site. And that was something that certain parts of the city really wanted to encourage. And that's why that policy was in there. But it was having some unintended consequences in some of the areas in the peninsula, like the areas south of Gandy, where the roads and the infrastructure had not kept up and they are more vulnerable to storms. And so we needed to take a look at that. And so we've got a revision that's coming forward to the Planning Commission in September that will look at applying that tool, that policy, only in the more central city area, West Shore, downtown, up to the university area, and in New Tampa, not allowing it, and in the peninsula, not allowing it. So that's the types of things that something about coastal planning has sort of this trickle effect into how we policy about land use and development. We also have a number of policies encouraging more sustainable building practices and things of that nature as well. Sure,
absolutely. So we got about 10, 15 more minutes. So if any of our attendees, if you have any more questions or comments, certainly drop them into the Q&A. And I've been reading them as it's been going on, try to answer a couple of them as well. But certainly, if you have any more questions, certainly submit them now. So Melissa, kind of walk us through an example of that the public hearing process, getting input from the community. So let's say the comprehensive plan allows X to happen, zoning is Y, and I'm a developer and say, okay, I want to build this. But it might be that all the neighbors around it don't like it. So, how does that factor in to say, okay, well, yes, the plan allows it, but the community doesn't allow it? What's that dynamic there going back and forth between something like that?
Yeah, that's one of the really interesting parts of this profession is that ultimately my job is to make a recommendation, and the elected officials make the final decision. And those aren't always in sync, in large part because of the dynamic that you just described, because the community may not be in agreement with something that's proposed, even if it is in our plan and we believe it's consistent with our plan. And that's I think something that as planners, sometimes we struggle with, that the neighbors who live right next door don't often want to see the change that from a larger, more global perspective, we see needs to happen in that area to accommodate growth countywide. So, the way that we try to tackle that is to educate folks on what these choices mean, and put forward that in a straightforward and factual manner. Try to present folks with some of the pros and cons. That I use this example with my neighbors quite regularly, because there are some apartments going up on Bloomingdale that they're not happy about. I'll say, well, the apartments can go there on Bloomingdale, where perhaps there's a bus route that goes by it and people might be able to take the bus. I know Bloomingdale Avenue is jammed with traffic, but that, or those same people are still going to move to Hillsborough County. They could go out past Fishhawk and build on one of those strawberry fields out there, and we wouldn't have local strawberries. And those same folks would drive past our house to get to work. So those are some of the choices and the trade-offs. It doesn't always work to explain and educate folks. Sometimes people just, are not happy with what's being proposed. And ultimately that's the choice of the local elected officials to represent them. And, many times the city council or board of county commissioners make a decision that is contrary to our recommendation. And that's just part of how it works.
Sure. So as a planner, is your first mindset to say, okay, we want growth and development, or do we say, maybe we don't want as much growth and development? What's that balance there to say, as a planner, we want to see a lot of things happen in our community?
I would say we want the growth and development in the right locations. And so we want it in places that will support us building great places like Water Street, where you'll be able to live and work and play, go out to eat and shop. We want it in places where it's not hurting the environment, where it's supporting creating more of a transit system and more choices. And, certainly we understand there are going to be stable neighborhoods that we want to protect too. And so not every place in the urban service area or in the city is the right place to increase density. And that's something that we're always scrutinizing as we look at the future land use map and making changes over time, is what are the right places? What are the right corridors to focus on and put more density or more jobs along so that can support transit? And what are the places where, it being the way it is just fine.
Sure. Okay. Nice. Well, we got a couple more minutes. I got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll answer any that come in.
Okay.
But I know that, Plain Hillsborough, they have several commissions and committees that are open to the public. Obviously they have to go through the application process and be appointed. But there are ways that we as regular citizens of Hillsborough County can come, have an input, have an say in what happens at Plain Hillsborough. So can you walk us through a couple of those ways where we as everyday citizens can be a part of this planning process?
Yeah. Well, certainly the Planning Commission is a 10-member appointed body. 4 of the members are appointed by the BOCC, 4 by City of Tampa, 1 by Plant City, and 1 by Temple Terrace. As openings come up, they're open to anyone who lives within that jurisdiction. I believe that there should be 2 openings for the City of Tampa coming up in the next few months. So that's one option. Those are appointed by those bodies, so you have to apply for that. Through the transportation planning side, we have a number of committees. We have a Citizens Advisory Committee, a Livable Roadways Committee. Now I'm not thinking of all of their names, but a number of different ways folks can get involved in official committees. Those are also appointed officially by the MPO board. But there are also a lot of ways folks can get involved that's not a monthly commitment to being a volunteer on a committee. On our website, there's a whole tab about being involved. We regularly have surveys and ways that people can give us input on different projects, whether it be a transportation project. And I think we've got something about a smart cities plan up there right now. People can weigh in on. We've had a lot of opportunities for folks to weigh in on growth and development in Waimama and Balm over the last few months. So those opportunities might be geographically based, they might be topically based, but we regularly have opportunities for folks to weigh in. Planners are all about getting input and hearing from the community. So it's really important that, and you all can help us by not only taking those surveys, but also sharing them with your friends, neighbors, clients, whomever, who might have opinions on these topics. We love that. So there are a lot of community meetings. We have a lot of public hearings, as I said, on different development approvals. One thing that I've seen start to emerge in some of these other communities is a group that is sort of counter to the not in my backyard movement. NIMBYs are sort of what's been dubbed for those neighbors who don't want the change and who come out and say no to a lot of projects. In some communities, there have started to be YIMBYs, yes in my backyard groups, and those groups then come and advocate for the density, for the more intensive employment opportunities in some of these areas, and provide a little bit of that counterbalance to the always saying no neighbors, which is a potential interesting opportunity for folks to consider. I think that probably covers most of the ways folks can get involved.
Nice. Well, I know. So I personally, I'm a big maps guy. I love geography. And I will say your website, the Plan Hillsborough website, is just chock full of maps and resources for people to use. So kind of walk us through, we as real estate practitioners that, especially in commercial real estate, that's very important to us, the zoning, future land use, all that. Walk us through some of the tools and resources that your website has that we can go take a look at and use for us and for our clients.
Yeah, so our website is planhillsborough.org, and we have an entire tab on data, tools, and links. And we have a number of mapping tools that one in particular, the Planning Information Map app, is really great in showing what the future land use category is, whether it's in the coastal high hazard area, whether there are wetlands on it, things of that nature. We also have a building permit database that is updated a couple of times a year that shows not only where building permits across all of the local governments are coming right now, but also historically where they've been. And displays them by whether it's single family, detached, attached, mobile homes, apartments. So that can give you an idea of where some of the trends are. I know in particular, some of the commercial real estate folks like being able to see where the new development's coming, because that's an indicator of maybe the need for another Publix or whatever it might be. So they tap into that information a lot. We have mapping apps up there that also outline some of the transportation improvements that are coming. It's called the TIP tool, the Transportation Improvement Plan, shows what's coming in the next 5 years. And so that will show some of those improvements. We have a bike suitability map. If you're an avid cyclist, that can be helpful to find the best route to safely ride your bike through the community. We have a health atlas that shows different indicators of things like chronic disease, availability of different services, even things like grocery stores in the community, to identify disparities in our community that we might be looking to change. So those are just a couple of the examples of things that are up there.
Yeah. Well, I knew you had a lot. I didn't even know a couple of those as well. So thank you very much for sharing. Sure. Jacob has dropped a link for some of those in the chat. And so if you're watching in the chat, make sure to check out a couple of those links.
You did well. That's perfect. Thank you.
So one last question before before I let you go, and maybe this is a question for Melissa, the Hillsborough County resident, and not necessarily Melissa, the executive director. If you had a magic wand and could wave it and make any development changes, in Hillsborough County that you wanted to see, what are some of those changes that you would like to see moving forward here in Hillsborough County?
That's a great question. So I think probably the most transformative thing that we could do is create that more robust transit system. Having grown up in the DC area, the ability to have the metro as an alternative was really is something that I miss, and not just that we had that rail system, but then the offshoot of that of a much more the bus system that tied into it. Where I grew up, you could get on the bus, get to the metro, and I could be down near the Capitol, in about 30 minutes. And that was really empowering as a young person to not have to always rely on my parents for everything. So I think that's one thing that I would say I miss a lot, and I would love to see happen here. And I think we've got so much potential. Areas like the area around the University of South Florida has so much potential for redevelopment, but it is very hard because it's not well connected to some of the other employment centers. Having to get on 275 every day, or 75 these days, it's just not really appealing necessarily to folks. And so I think those things go hand in hand. To get the kind of redevelopment we'd love to see, we need the transit system. I would love to see, if one of y'all can make it happen, that'd be awesome. The dog track redeveloped.
Seriously,
please.
yeah.
Please, somebody do that. There's certainly some spots like that we are underutilizing. And somebody with a vision, just like Jeff Finnick did with Water Street, could turn something like that Dog Street. I mean, it's a dog track area. I mean, it's right by the river. Goodness, what an amazing piece of property to do something different with.
There you go. Well, everybody watching got a hot tip from Melissa about what to do next for development. Well, Melissa, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate the insights in the conversation. To everybody listening and watching, we thank you very much for coming. Again, this is part of our monthly ongoing series with the Government Affairs Committee at Greater Tampa Realtors. We meet the first Friday of every month at 9:30. We do both offer virtual and in person. So if you want to tune in, watch a little bit more about what we do, we encourage you to come to that. And again, we'll keep you posted for our September series. We have a great panel coming in for September as well. But again, Melissa, thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.